Sky Howdy, and welcome back to another exciting, awesome, amazing, and incredible episode of World Bigfoot Radio. And before we get right into the show, which we are going to do as swiftly as possible, let me get you guys up to date on some stuff. Got some exciting news. There's going to be a big top of the continent Bigfoot expedition going on here in the middle of next month. Have former guests that have been on my show from all over North America showing up for it. Really excited, and you, of course, are going to be along with us because we will be recording everything, showing it on future shows. We're also working in coordination with the Paranormal Portal over on YouTube and all the podcasting platforms and TFR Radio and Revolver Radio Network. They are working with us to try and bring a live broadcast from the first location we're going to be camping and squatching at that weekend, which is a ghost town. And this ghost town, we've had multiple expeditions there before. It's definitely haunted. The locals are terrified of it. They won't camp there. There's all kinds of bad legends and stuff about it. Indian burial ground, old abandoned ghost town, collapsed mine, little people, Bigfoot, ghosts. Yeah, so should be incredibly fun. Hope you guys get a chance to check it out. That, if everything works, will be on Friday, August 7 Pacific time. You can watch the show on Paranormal Portal on YouTube. And hopefully all of the technical bugs will be worked out and we can make it run. And you guys will be able to catch part of the expedition live from the field as it begins. So don't miss that. Okay, and on to the next thing. I got to show some appreciation and some big thank yous to all the folks that have been keeping the show coming to you, because we are 100% viewer funded since the adpocalypse of YouTube decided to take everybody's money away from them because, they don't like the truth. So here's to those that are keeping this show coming. The heroes of the realm, the huge, huge, huge supporters that have really kept things going for the last 2 months. Here's the list: Avis and Lloyd, Texas Cat, Pam E, Sherry M, Kenny W, Vinny G the 3, Elaine C, Bruce M, Gregory H, and Linda T, and also the Knights of the Realm, let's not forget them: Alessa H, Eric H, Julie B, Amanda K, Peter B, and Beverly P. I love you guys. Thank you so much. And all the rest of you out there that enjoy this show, you thank them too, because they are the ones that is bringing this show to you. Another piece of exciting news that we have coming up here is that due to the overwhelming necessity for it, and finally somebody that I know and trust stepping up and being willing to do this thankless and payless job, we now have a cryptid report hotline. So, if you saw Bigfoot walk across the road, this might not be where you want to call. If you have something that really terrified you and you can't go to sleep and you're like maybe having PTSD and stuff like that, this is the one you would want to get a hold of. So you can just drop me a line at my email, worldbigfootcentral@yahoo.com, and I will put you in touch with our very friendly and helpful cryptid report hotline operator, Deb, who will listen patiently, kindly, and with sympathy to whatever horrible thing you have to tell her. She's a wonderful person, and you can trust her to believe what you're saying and to probably be able to offer advice. If it's anything more that she can deal with, she'll put you in touch with me and I'll help you out. So, and don't forget, you can also find World Bigfoot Radio now on BitChute. The link is in the description. So come on over and subscribe. If you're already on BitChute, you can get the shows over there now too. And also, if you want to join the Heroes of the Realm and the Knights of the Realm and support the show, you can do that at paypal.me/World Bigfoot Central. And with that, let's get on with the show. It's about time here. This is somebody I should have had on the show a long time ago, and I've just been slacking, and it's my fault, and I officially apologize. But today with us, we got somebody from that part of the country I rarely get anybody on the show from. Again, it's my fault. I'm sorry. I apologize. And this is somebody I've actually been on his show before, and it's about time I had him on my show. And with that, warm welcome, and thanks for being on the show. And welcome to the show, Chuck Schlabs from Chasing the Beast.
Thanks for having me, dude. I appreciate you getting me on the show, and it's a pleasure. So thank you very much.
Pleasure to have you here, man. I've been looking forward to getting you on here for a while now, and I keep getting interrupted by other things going on. It's kind of funny. I don't know if you do it this way, but I got a list of like, okay, I have to have this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy. And then like a bunch of people out of the blue that you don't even know who they are pop up and go, hey, this happened to me. And you're like, oh, yeah, okay. Well, let's do your story.
Yeah.
And it takes you a while to work. It takes you a while to work your way down the list and get to the people that initially were at the top of your list that you're going, I really want these guys to come on the show. So I'm sorry again, man. I apologize officially, but it's great to have you here. And once again, let me reiterate to everybody out there that may not know about it. You also have a really cool Bigfoot show. You're based down in the south central sort of Oklahoma, Texas zone, right?
Yes, sir. Sure am.
Chasing the Beast, and he's been doing it for quite a long time, not only doing the show, but literally chasing the Beast, which is why we're having Chuck on here today, because he's got some cool pics to share with us and some stories about some of the stuff that's happened to him. So first of all, let's start you out with the usual question. How did you become aware of and get involved with this whole dang weird Bigfoot thing?
Well, that goes back a long time ago. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, there was a movie that came out. I think it was in 1976, and it was called Sasquatch: The Legend of Bigfoot, or I may have that backwards. Bigfoot: The Legend of Sasquatch. I can't remember. Anyway, I went and watched that film, and as a young man, it drew me in, and I began to have this passion for the subject. And in school, they used to have these, I don't know if you're familiar with them, Duke, but they used to have these scholastic book order things that they would hand out to you in class, and you'd go home and look at everything that's on there, and you would pick out books that you wanted, and you ended up buying them. Well,
a weekly reader.
Yes, exactly. And every Bigfoot book, Yeti, Loch Ness Monster, any of that kind of stuff, I just drew it into me. So I was fascinated with the subject after I saw the movie, and I always wanted to see one. And I thought in my own mind that if I ever wanted to get that opportunity, then I would have to go up to somewhere in the Northwest, Washington, Oregon, someplace in Canada, Vancouver, or any place like that. So I was infatuated with it for quite a while. And then, of course, as I got a little bit older, other things began to come up that I was interested in: athletics, girls, the whole 9 yards. So the whole Bigfoot subject was put on the back burner. As I progressed, I got married and had my own son. Of course, the marriage didn't last, but I still have my son, and so my son used to watch. When Finding Bigfoot came out, we used to watch that show all the time. And of course, my interest started to come back, and I wasn't really there again. I was thinking that if I ever wanted to see one or experience one, and at this time I have my son too, so I wanted him to experience some things as well. And so what happened was, we had the Finding Bigfoot come to the state of Oklahoma. They did an episode here and had a town hall meeting. And the first thing that came to my mind was, what are these guys doing here? I wasn't expecting, I thought it may be some kind of publicity. They're trying to get better known and that sort of thing. And so I asked my son if he wanted to go, and we went to the town hall meeting. Well, when we got there, I bet you there was 1,000 people at the town hall meeting. And I thought to myself, why are all these people here? I did not understand what was actually taking place. And what was really cool is I got to meet all four of the hosts of the show, Bobo and Renee and Cliff and Moneymaker, and got to talk to each one of them. And it was a really cool experience. But the coolest thing about that experience was the people that were standing in line to go to the town hall meeting. And there was a guy standing there waiting in line, and he had a cast footprint that was about 16 inches long. And I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, where'd you get that at? I'd like to have one of those." And so he says, he names off this river, and this river is just south of me, about 20 miles. And I think my mouth hit the ground. It dawned on me that, hey, we have a possibility of Bigfoot being in Oklahoma. And from that moment on, at that time I worked nights for an oil and gas company, and I always kept my eyes open, was aware of my surroundings every time I went to a location. And I began to see what I would call signs that the possibility of Bigfoot being in the area was there. And then back in November of 2015, my dispatcher sent me to a location that I had been to numerous times, and it was north of me where I live. It was north of me on a river that's north of me. I live in a really cool area because I've got a river to the south of me, and I got a river to the north of me, and there's all kinds of tributaries and creeks and lakes and ponds all around me. Some of these areas, Duke, you would never ever think that Bigfoot could even live in an area like that, because most of the surrounding area, even though we got the rivers and the creeks and the tributaries and all that kind of stuff, most of the area is farmland. It's wide open farmland, wheat fields, the whole 9 yards. But on the tributaries, the creeks, and the rivers, tons of brush, tons of cover, and just great opportunities out there for them to actually live in. And so back to this particular morning, I arrived at this location, and like I said, it's on the river, and I'd been there a bunch of times, had never ever experienced anything weird or out of the ordinary, never saw anything, never heard anything. And I arrived there that morning, and right about 6 o'clock in the morning, I pulled up on location. I stepped out of my truck, and as soon as my feet hit the ground, every hair in my arm stood up. And I thought to myself, something's not right. This doesn't feel right. And being in the frame of mind that it was November, it was the beginning of deer season, the first thing that came to mind, well, there must be a hunter nearby. And so I walked around the location, looked, listened, didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. I was expecting for a hunter to come out and say, "Hey, I'm hunting here," or something like that, but that never happened. At that point, I thought, I must be really tired, because this feeling that I have is a really weird feeling. So I went ahead and started my job, and I jumped up into the cab of my truck, and I was sitting there writing the ticket for the job. And as I'm writing on the ticket, out of the corner of my eye, I see movement straight in front of me. And I look up, and there he was. And he was probably 30, 40 yards from me, maybe if that. And he was in real thick brush. The thick brush had a tree there beside it, and he was peeking around that tree at me. I could clearly see his face, I could clearly see his shoulders, and I could see really, really good definition of what I was looking at. And so I immediately grabbed my phone, and I snapped a couple pictures of it. And I don't think I sent you those pictures, but
make sure you gotta send them now, because you mentioned them. Too late now.
I know. So I immediately snapped a couple pictures. Now I put my camera down, and I sit there and I stared at it for probably, God, it seemed like 2 or 3 minutes, but I know it was probably maybe a minute and a half. Never saw it blink, never saw it move. I mean, it looked like a statue standing there. At that point, I thought to myself, man, you really must be tired, because now you're becoming delirious. And so I finished the job, put all my equipment back on my truck, And as I drove off, I looked over there one more time, and when I looked over there, it was gone. And I knew instantly what I had seen, what I had experienced, because, there's no other way to explain what I saw.
Isn't it telling, though, that in the middle of seeing and photographing the thing, you're still not convinced that you're seeing and photographing it?
Sure. And I've had a couple of experiences like that, Duke, in the sense of your mind. The best way I can describe this is your mind tries to say you didn't see what you just saw.
Right. Or that point I was going to make, that we're so programmed by the social conditioning that Bigfoot is not real and it's imaginary, that even when you're standing there looking at one, taking a damn picture of it, you're still trying to tell yourself, well, I'm just, I'm tired. This isn't really happening.
That's right. And that does happen. And so after that experience, I'm not one of those kind of guys that is going to keep quiet about what took place. So I made the mistake of going back to work that morning in the office and telling people and showing people the picture that I took. And of course, I got laughed at and ridiculed for what I was saying and stuff. And, I can understand that. But anyway, I kept doing what I was doing. The following year, in February of 2016, I went down to the Sam Houston National Forest, the Big Thicket in Texas, and where Bob Garrett and all those guys were starting expeditions. And I was actually on the very first expedition that they put together. And it was the best experience I think I've ever had in my life. I recorded some amazing yells and screams in the middle of the night. And anybody that listens to my show, at the very beginning of my show, I actually have one of the best recordings that I've ever taken of, it sounds like a couple males yelling and screaming off in the distance. It sounds like a couple males yelling and screaming off in the distance. Got a track, cast my very first track was down there, and it was about 14 inches long and probably 6 or 7 inches wide. It was a pretty good sized track. Actually saw several while I was there, which was really amazing. Wow. One particular incident that happened while I was there is we had a couple guys in the camp, and it was after dark. And it was right before we went on a little trail hike. These two guys were walking away from camp, and they were actually looking for tracks. The amazing thing about that whole episode is I had set out a recorder exactly where they were walking toward. And as they're walking toward my recorder, I hear these two guys talking, and they're talking, and all of a sudden you hear this whack. They kind of are silent for a second, and then they start asking each other, "Did you just throw something at me?" And the other one said, "No, I didn't throw anything." And hearing these guys' conversation go back and forth after the whack is pretty funny. It's kind of comical. What had happened was they're in the state park down there. They had taken they had made these concrete circles for fire pits. And the next morning when I went out and got my recorder, I found one of those fire rings, and it was busted up. What was thrown at them, and they found it that night, was a great big piece of concrete that hit a tree in between the two of them and almost landed at their feet.
Yikes.
So that was pretty cool that I caught all that on audio, and these guys experienced what they experienced.
Well, you got to, since you referenced it, you've got to at least share the calls that you got for
Okay.
with the viewers of my show.
Well, one thing that happened after the concrete incident happened, they split us up into two groups. Down there in the big thicket where gas and oil companies have come in and they've got wells, they have pipelines that are buried underground. Well, everywhere there's a pipeline, they have, it's all clear cut. It's about 10 feet wide and it goes all the way down the pipeline. And
nice convenient travel corridors for them.
Exactly. And half of us went one direction and half of us went the other direction. I think everybody in my group, there was about 12 of us, I think. It was us and two guides. And I think everybody in the group had either night vision or FLIRs. And we started walking down this trail, lights out, and we could hear what sounded like bipedal footsteps beside us as we were walking down this fire lane, and we heard a whoop, and I think we even heard one or two wood knocks as we're walking through there. And we walked a pretty good distance. Nothing really crazy happened. Then we found a location to where there was a great big huge tree that had fallen. And I'm talking, it was probably, I don't know, 3 feet in diameter maybe. That was going to be a stopping point for us. So we stopped there, and as we stopped there, some guys were on one side of the fire lane and the rest of us were on the other side of the fire lane. And there, right by that tree that had fallen, there was about a 4-foot gap in between the trees and brush. Because when you walk down through there, it's like you have two walls on each side of you, right off the fire lane. And because the brush and the trees are so thick. And at this one particular spot, there was, like I said, there was like a 4-foot gap. Well, when I had Generation 3 night vision, and as I focused in on that area, I see one. And this guy is on all fours. I say guy, it could have been a female, not really sure. He was on all fours, or she was on all fours, and she was swaying back and forth like a gorilla. This thing was probably, Duke, just estimation, probably 5 feet from me.
Wow.
And the head, even though it was on all fours, the head of this thing came up to my chest. And so it was pretty massive. And immediately I turned to the guy behind me who had a FLIR, and I said, hey, get up here with your FLIR. I got something. So he comes up there with a FLIR. He sees it on the FLIR and catches it on the FLIR. So we both were looking at the same thing. And about that time, the guys on the other side of the fire lane said, hey, we got something over here. And I turned and looked over to where these guys were standing, and I could see one walking down the wood line. And about that time, our two guides told us, hey guys, we're gonna have to be real careful because they're trying to flank us. Well, I turned back to the one that I had right next to me and was looking at him, and he rocked. I probably watched him for possibly about 3 minutes, and he just rocked back and forth. And then all of a sudden, he backstepped a couple times and turned to the left and was gone. And we continued. After that happened, we were really cautious about what we were doing and aware of what was going on around us. And the only other thing that happened during that walk on that trail was off in the distance, we see what looks like a ball of light. Every time we try to get close to it, it would go a different direction or get further away from us. And so that was really weird because I'd never ever experienced anything like that. And I'm not really into the paranormal side of things. So that was interesting to me to see. And trying to debunk that or say what it is or what it's not is pretty hard to do. So we went back to camp that night. I wasn't prepared when I got back to camp. Because number one, when I left Oklahoma to go down there, I was thinking I'm going to be closer to the equator. It's going to be warmer than what it is in Oklahoma. So I'm not going to need my 0-degree sleeping bag or a lot of blankets or anything like that. I thought I was going to be comfortable. Well, when I arrived there, it was 56 degrees. So I thought to myself, this is cool. I can deal with this. Well, that night, the temperature dropped to 23 degrees.
Oh.
And I was not prepared for the cold weather at all.
That's good cold, yeah.
And so what I did was I decided that I would sleep in my truck. And my head was on the driver's side, my feet were on the passenger side. About 3 o'clock in the morning, my recorders actually picked up the screams and the yells about 2 o'clock that morning. So it was about an hour later after the sounds that something woke me up. And I laid there and I was looking at my ceiling in my truck. I eased my way up and looked out the passenger window. Well, in my passenger window was this great big face staring at me. I saw his eyes. He had a snarl on his face. I saw his teeth. You remember the chiclet gum that they used to have?
Yep.
That's what his teeth looked like.
Giant.
And yeah, giant chiclets. And on the sides, there were even canines.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh crap, what am I going to do now? I mean, his face took up my whole window on my passenger side of my truck. And I thought, well, I'm in trouble. And so I laid back down and closed my eyes. And I was thinking to myself, well, if he wants me, he's going to get me now. And I waited and waited and waited with my eyes closed. Nothing happened. A minute or two went by and I eased back up and opened my eyes and he was gone. And for the longest time, dude, we were talking earlier about how your mind tries to compensate for what you just saw. So my mind was telling me, hey, you just imagine that.
Yeah.
Or you dreamed it, one of the two. And so I didn't discuss that with anybody, what I had experienced that night. And a couple of years go by and I became really good friends with Kumbo of the Bigfoot Outlaws. And Kumbo and I were talking one night on the phone, and I was telling Kumbo about this experience. And I was thinking, yeah, I even imagined this thing. And Kumbo says to me, he says, you didn't imagine that. That really happened to you. And I said, well, how do you know that? And he said, because the very first time I had an experience like that, I was 4 years old and one was picking on my window and I thought the same thing. So the more and more I thought about that experience, the more and more I realized that my mind had been trying to convince me otherwise. And so that was my experience down there. And we had other experiences there. It was just an amazing trip for me. And that trip actually propelled me into doing what I'm doing today as far as the show goes, the Facebook page and all that. My goal has always been to tell the truth, talk about my experiences, let people know that these things are real. I'm not out to prove anything, dude, because I have my proof. There's people out there that have had encounters that, like you talked about earlier, have the PTSD syndrome going on because of what they saw. And I understand that. And if I can help just one person go through that and realize that, you're okay, then it's worth it.
Yep. Well, the other thing too is just general information and knowledge. It'd be like if we had grizzly bears all over North America and the government and everybody else was saying they didn't exist. You know how many people would be getting mugged? That would be bad news. So, if people know, even if they've never seen one or never had an experience, if they go get the information and they find out that, according to all these people, at least these things are out here, and here's what they generally do, and here's sort of what you might be able to expect that they would do. Then if they run into one, they hopefully won't do something stupid like try and shoot it, or go run screaming the opposite direction and trigger a chase response. Two bad options. They won't go give it a handful of beef jerky and ask it to play pinochle. Just kind of like need some basic information out there so people don't do dumb things. But you know enough about these things that in general, they're not really that aggressive or dangerous. You got to kind of put yourself into a position where you're asking for it almost. I mean, there's exceptions to that. They do attack people sometimes, but in general, they're probably less dangerous than a dang black bear is.
Right. And I have a research group, and we go out into the field quite a bit, and we go in armed, but we're not armed for Bigfoot's sake. In our area, we're more concerned about the wild hogs because Oklahoma, Texas, all these areas have a wild hog problem. And wild hogs will not hesitate. If they see you, they will attack you.
And they will shred you, man. Those big old nasty tusks that they got on them. Oh boy.
So when I came back from that trip, I'll tell you a real funny story real quick. My brother, who's 10 years younger than me, he's not into Bigfoot. He doesn't really believe in Bigfoot. And he called me as I was driving home, and he wanted to know what had happened and what I experienced. So I began to tell him some of these stories that I experienced, and he got real quiet. And I said, "Are you still there?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "What's the matter?" And he goes, I still hunt, I still go out in the woods, and I really don't want to know what's out there. And I think a lot of people, Duke, have that mindset. It's a fear factor that they have within themselves, that instead of admitting that you're afraid that there could be something out there in the woods that's bigger than you and could rip you apart, they would rather laugh and make fun of, and that's their way of coping with the possibility of these things actually existing. So when I got home after my little conversation with my brother, I thought, you know what? People need to know about these things. And so I started going out in the woods looking for things, and I started my own show with the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribe. Actually got a hold of me and wanted me to do a show on their radio station, and their reservation is just right up the road from me. And so I got on board with them, started doing a 30-minute show with them. I think my show ended up being #1 on their station. And after a period of time, they lost all their funding for the radio show, and so they closed it down. Well, I struggled with, what am I going to do now as far as my show is concerned? And I decided to hop on YouTube, and with the help of several great individuals, they got me started so I could figure out how to edit and all that kind of stuff. So I've had to learn as I go on what to do on the technical side of things. But in the meantime, I still go out and explore. I still go out and look. I still go investigate. I've been on several investigations here in the state of Oklahoma of people who have had sightings. I've had lots of great adventures. I've been to Kentucky, Tennessee, Texas, all over Oklahoma. So, it's a part of me now that there's no turning back on what I do. I enjoy what I do. I love to hear people's stories and encounters, and I love to help people if I can. So my next experience, Duke, is I have a guy that's on my team that called me up out of the blue one day and said, "Hey, I've been experiencing these things since I was 14. I know how to track them. I know what to look for. Would you come up to my part of Oklahoma and go research with me?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I went up to this area. First day there, he took me to some really amazing spots and showed me around. Found some great wood structures in that area. We actually went to a creek, and on that creek, one of the biggest tracks I've ever found in the state of Oklahoma was on that creek, and it was 23 inches long.
Good Lord.
The big toe on the track was bigger than 3 of my fingers put together. I mean, this track was massive.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing about that track, and I casted a bunch of tracks at that area, but I couldn't get a good enough quality track of the 23-inch print. And the reason is the babies or the young were actually following him, and they would step in his tracks. So every one of his tracks was deformed or out of focus. I mean, you could see some definition, but all the definition wasn't there. And even now to this day, I wish I would have at least casted part of that track, but I didn't. Hindsight's 2020. But I did cast a lot of tracks, and I sent you the pictures on those tracks.
Right on.
And so you have those pics of that.
And we're looking at them.
And also, in that same area, like I said, tons of wood structures. I sent you pictures of those. And we actually found, and I don't know if I sent you these pics, but we actually found what we thought could be burial mounds. I mean, these things are 10 to 12 feet long, and they're 3 feet wide and about 3 feet tall. And these things are all over the woods in this area. I mean, they're everywhere. You can see these.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because when I was growing up in northern Minnesota, we had an area back in our woods where we found that same exact thing. And it was just the spookiest damn area. It didn't matter if it was the most beautiful day ever. As soon as you went into that area, it was creepy, and you couldn't wait to get out of it.
Mm-hmm. The thing about that area is every time we go in there, we're followed, and we know we're followed.
Yeah.
I had a FLIR with me on that day, and we knew something was following us because we heard some whoops off in the distance, heard some wood knocks off in the distance, but behind us, we knew something was following us. So I turned around with my FLIR at one time, and we counted 7 that were following us through the woods. And there were 4 adults and 3 juveniles. And they were in the real thick brush, real big thickets. And so it was hard to even try to get a picture of one. Well, at this particular time, I carried a Canon camera with a 200 millimeter zoom lens. And so we stopped at one point because every now and then we would see one of the juveniles peeking around a bush or a tree. So we stopped. I kneeled down on the ground with my camera, and as we're sitting there, this thing would peek around the tree at us. This is broad daylight too. He had a branch right up near his face that he was peeking around. Well, every time I would pull my camera up to take a picture of him, he would move that branch in front of his face. And I would put my camera down, he'd move the branch back and look at us again. I pull my camera up, and he'd move the branch. He played cat and mouse with me for several minutes. And finally, I tricked him and actually got a picture of his face. And I think I sent you that picture. It's a very close-up picture of his face. And the amazing thing about that picture is it kind of falls into the definition of possible blob squatch, but if you look real close, you can see hair, you can see the 2 eyes, you can see the nose, and it's peeking around the branch. Maybe right before the branch, he lifts the branch over his face. But I took that picture, and we talked to a college student that had majored in photography. And when she looked at the picture, she knew exactly what it was, and she wanted to know where it was taken. And she told me, she said, you know why your picture's blurry? And I said, that's what I'm trying to figure out. And she told me, she said, well, what kind of lens are you using? I told her, I said, 200 millimeter lens. She goes, how far was it? I said, probably 30, 35 yards from me. And she said, that's why. She said, for something that's 30 to 35 yards from you, you need at least a 300 millimeter zoom lens. She said, your pictures will be more clear. So I went out and got me a 300 millimeters in lens. And so that's what I research with now. I've actually caught some really good photographs. 3 of the pictures that I sent you is a picture of a juvenile, and you can clearly see the face, you can see the eyes, the nose, the mouth. And on those 3 pictures, it's a succession of pictures. The first picture is you can clearly see the face. The second picture, you see that he's actually trying to cover up part of his face with his hand. And the third picture, he's actually covered up his eye. You can't see his eye in the picture. That was an amazing experience in itself, because those were actually taking on the Native American reservation that's just south of me here. And they've had reports of Bigfoot for, years and years and years. And they are there. I went up there to investigate, and at that time I had a girlfriend that was into this, and she was with me. And on the reservation, let me describe this to you. On the back part of the reservation is a creek that runs, and it actually has a spring that bubbles up from the ground, and they have a wooden walking bridge that goes across the creek. And we were walking, this is in broad daylight too, we were walking across the bridge. That's when we snapped the pictures. And then all of a sudden we hear a growl. I didn't think anything of it. And I keep walking toward the bridge, because if you go across the bridge and go back on the back part of the reservation, it's nothing but wild timber, lots of brush, lots of thickets, and so on and so forth. So I knew that was an area that we could go back there and possibly have something happen to us, not knowing that we actually were having stuff happen to us as we were walking. And as soon as this growl happened, she reached up and grabbed a hold of my shirt and pulled me backwards. And she said, "We got to turn back." And I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "I feel like I'm fixing to throw up." And she got really, really sick. And we ended up backing out of there and resting at a picnic table area. And she actually saw another one. The one that I took the picture of was black. The juvenile was black. The one that she saw was brown. And she told me that it was on all fours. And it stood out to her because everything around it was not that color of brown. And she jumped when she seen it. And I said, "What's wrong? What's the matter?" She goes, "I just saw one." And what she described was a brown one that was on all fours that took off as soon as he realized that she was looking at him. And since that time, I've actually talked to some of the people on the reservation, and they told me that there's an adult that's brown, and he's really, really big. And this little one, this black one, follows him around. If you see them, they're together almost all the time. Huh. And so that's what we kind of, that's what we ran into. And so since then, I've done a lot of things. I've been a lot of places. I actually went on a expedition to Land of the Lakes with Kumbo and a bunch of other people, and that was an amazing experience. I was taught by Bob Garrett that if you're out in the woods and you're hiking, randomly take pictures, because you never know what you're going to catch.
Uh-huh.
And he was right about that. There are times when I'll be walking down trails or in the bush somewhere, and I'll get this urge or this intuition that I need to start snapping pictures. And I do that. And I don't necessarily see anything when I get that intuition. I just get this feeling, and I start taking pictures. Well, I've had really good results with that. And while at Land Between the Lakes, we went to the area where people were killed, and I got to see those areas. And I don't know if people are familiar with that story. And
is this when the Bigfoot Outlaws had their meet and greet down there, or was this a different outing?
This is a different outing.
Okay.
And that the whole story of that family is, I think there's a lot of people that questions what took place there in the account. But anyway, we went to the exact same area where that took place. And I got to a certain point where I thought, I need to take some pictures. That intuition kicked in. I took a bunch of pictures in that area, but 3 of the pictures that I took, and I think I sent you those too, Duke. There's one picture where you see a V of a tree, and there's one that's standing in the V of the tree, and he's looking at me as I snap the picture. It's kind of blurry. It's a blob squatch photo for all those people out there. And then there's another one, another picture that I took of one that looks to be a pretty good sized guy. It's kind of blurry. It's the only black spot in the photo, and you can almost see the whole body shot there on that picture. And then another photo that I took there was a picture of a bush, and underneath the bush, you see the face of one that's laying under the bush, and he's looking at me. You can clearly see his eyes, his nose, and I've had several people tell me, that's the money shot. Well, I don't know what exactly that means, but it is what it is. I get lucky a lot of times when I go out in the woods and I do stuff like this, when I periodically snap pictures and I get home and I start looking at the pictures, and lo and behold, I've captured something. So you can either call it luck, you can call it I've been blessed or not blessed, whatever you want to look at, however you want to look at it. But a lot of great places that I've been, active places, and seen a lot of tracks and had some really awesome experiences. Just this last October, I went down to Honobi, which is the place where the siege took place, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And we went down there, me and my team went down there for the Bigfoot convention that they hold there every year. We camped away from where the convention is and had tents set up and everything else. And I recently bought a night vision video camera, and it's called an Aurora, and it's made by Psionics. And I had just bought that camera before this trip, and so when we got down there, I started playing around with it and looking at its functions and stuff like that. Well, lo and behold, as I'm filming, and I don't even realize what I'm really looking at, I'm just trying to figure out this camera, but not 40 yards from my tent is a Bigfoot that it was in between 2 trees, peeking around the tree at me as I'm filming, and I don't even realize it. And it's a night vision video camera pic that I sent you, and if you look at that pic and you zoom into it, you can actually see the eyes, because when the camera hit him in the face, it lit up his eyes.
Nice.
So one of the guys, a couple of days later, went over there and measured how tall this thing would have been if he's standing there, and he measured approximately 9 foot 3 inches.
Big boy.
Mm-hmm. Very big. Anyway, I just keep doing what I'm doing, and I've had, I'm sure like you, I've been hassled a little bit by some people. I'm not going to mention any entities, but they like to discredit, not necessarily discredit, but harass you. I've actually been audited by the IRS, and I went to a CPA, and he looked over all my records. And he said, well, you have no record of this. And I said, I know. That's why I'm coming to see you. And he said, the only thing I can tell you is they have records. You don't have records, and it's their word against yours. So if I was you, I'd just pay it and be done. So that's what I ended up doing. That happened because I used the Freedom of Information Act and contacted about 7 different government agencies and told them that I wanted to know what they know about Bigfoot. So I kind of asked for it, I think.
Yeah, I don't usually get any. My harassment is more low level, where it's like you can pass it off as being coincidental.
Mm-hmm.
The only direct I get is basically with my guests, who occasionally get threatened or warned to not be on the show again or something.
Right. Well, in my situation, the amazing thing about what I did was I actually got a couple of responses. And one of the responses that I got back was from someplace in California saying, yeah, one of the shoe companies here has come out with a new shoe called Bigfoot. And I'm thinking, what's that have to do with anything that I asked for? And then I had, I think it was Wildlife Fish and Game, actually sent me one report that talked about a lady and two of her friends were driving home one night. This happened in Oregon. And as they're driving down the highway, one crossed in front of them as they were driving down the highway. And of course, Wildlife Fish and Game, because it was reported to them, I think that's the entity, they actually had to go out and investigate it. So when they went out and investigated, of course, they didn't find anything, but they did send me that report. That was the only report that I got. And one agency said we need specific names, dates, and places, not thinking that I would respond back to their demands. I sent back 2 pages of dates, names, and places and got no response from them. It was 3 months later that I got audited by the IRS. So I think that may have had something to do with it.
So you still haven't received any of this so-called free, quote-unquote, information about this yet, then?
No. No. Still looking forward to that. I have had some interesting conversations with several people that made me think they were in the know, but so far, nothing really definitive.
Well, let's not get blue in the face from holding our breath or anything, and we'll just continue on.
That's right. Well, I will tell you this. We started a project, not me. There's a gentleman in Alabama and a gentleman in Maryland that contacted me and wanted me to be a part of an organization that they're putting together. And what they've done is they've put out a questionnaire based on people's sightings and encounters. And they're yes and no questions on the questionnaire. They don't have to give a detail of what they experienced, but that is available to them if they want to. And the yes and no answers that we get off the questionnaire goes into, all those answers are based on a point system, and it goes into a database and it computes the results of the totals of the points, and it gives us certain information consistent with their encounter. And what we're starting to see, and the reason why we wanted to do this, is we wanted to see if we could see some behavior patterns or, of what these things are and where those behavior patterns, what's the most significant thing about them. So we're putting this data together and we're putting the reports in, and we've got roughly about 130 reports right now, and we're still collecting reports. And we're starting to see a little bit of behavior pattern in what we're doing. And we're going to make this information available to the public. We're hoping that this is going to help researchers out in the field, and we want everybody on board. Like me, I don't have to get away from what I'm doing to help out. I can actually do both. They don't require absolute loyalty to what they're doing. Right. So you could be a part of it, be a researcher, put in your information or whatever you want to help out with, and hopefully we'll get to a point where if there's areas in the country, or not just in the country, but in the world, because hopefully eventually we'll get this over to Europe and Asia and other places like that who have sightings and encounters as well. But we'll be able to tell where the most likely spot is that you're gonna have an aggressive encounter. and we are seeing some of that data come forward. But Coast to Coast AM actually has our questionnaire, I think, on their website, if I'm not mistaken. We're starting to get people that's coming on board with what we're doing. And scientifically, behavior patterns is very important when it comes to these creatures, so you'll know what to expect when you go into the woods. And it gives us a detail of where a person is most likely to see a sighting, where encounters have occurred. And I tell you what, Duke, some of the stuff that we're finding out is very interesting. Probably the biggest percentage of sightings occur around people's homes, which is really interesting. I would have thought that, somebody was driving somewhere and saw one run across a field. Well, that does take place and that does happen, but the biggest part of the percentage of the sightings and encounters happen around people's homes.
There's another gentleman over in Michigan right now that's in the process of turning out a book where he's actually just, I think he's about ready to do it, or he just did it, but he's working on compiling all the sightings that he could find in Michigan, which turned out to be a lot more than what he thought it was going to be. And since he had this huge number of sightings, he did exactly what you're suggesting with it and tried to put together correlations between various data sets. And again, he was coming up with some interesting information there, like this percentage occurs at night, this percentage are roadside crossings, this percentage are blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So again, if you could get that information from all over the country, it'd be handy as hell. I know I was looking at our local information here in Montana. And you and me were joking about this last conversation I had with you, I think, where we were like comparing who's got the squatchiest place. And I think we kind of evened out on Oklahoma and Montana per capita are just about the same as far as density of Sasquatch. There's way too many of them. But the thing that I noticed up here is that out of all the sightings that I could get where it had been actual visual sightings, it was 90% or better were during the day.
Yep, that's exactly right. That's kind of what we're finding out too. And of course, some of that information that we're finding and people find is going to be a little bit skewed. And what I mean by that is most people are active during the day. So that would grant some credibility to the fact that most of the sightings and encounters are happening during the day.
Right.
So, I mean, you got to look at this information from two sides of the coin. As a researcher, we think that most of their activity happens at night or during the night, and that may be possible. Every time that we've been out researching, we try to go at midnight and stay out till wee hours of the morning, because that's the best time that these things are really active. At least that's what we've concluded. Now, that doesn't mean that's necessarily the case. Another statistic that we're finding is that more and more we're getting encounters and sightings in rural.
So make sure that you're kind to everyone. Safety first, last, and always. Pay it forward. Don't be mean to people if you don't have to be. Don't flip off the mountain giant. Don't poke Dogman with a stick. Don't punt the puck, would you? And for God's sake, whatever you do not hug the Wookiee.